All right, so we're kicking off Elevated Element Season 2 with our two guests. Today we've got Ashley and Ally. We're going to be talking about where we are now post George Floyd and after the verdict. So to introduce Ashley and Ally, you want to give just a brief background of what you do and who you are?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley. I am 24 years old. I'm a law student at UIC. The name just changed from John Marshall to UIC School of Law, going into my second year. Also the incoming president of the Black Law Student Association. I earned my first degree, which is my BS in broadcast journalism, which is how I met Ally. And then earned my second degree, which was a master in studies of law at UIC College of Law. I do a lot of community organizing work out in my local community with One Community, as well as Chicago Votes. We do a lot of legislative reform work, voting in prison, ending prison slave labor, Native American rights, etc. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Ally?
I'm Ally Christiani. I am 26 years old. I didn't know you were younger than me, Ashley, but I thought we were the same age, but that's fine. I'm 26 years old. We went to school together. I got my Bachelor of Arts in Broadcast Journalism, and currently I study child development and the associations with trauma, a lot of neurobiology, which I use for my community work, where I work with at-risk youth in surrounding impoverished areas in Miami. I also run my own blog called Address the Disconnect, where I detail African American history and how those disparities still exist today and essentially connect with one another. So it's kind of more or less an educational blog, but my main purpose is to eventually start doing more work with prisoners' rights programs. So that's kind of my niche, is working in prisons to address and help people better understand the effects of trauma and how it changes behaviors, and in that way help to fix the system that criminalizes what is essentially broken traumatic experiences.
So you two are both the perfect people to visit with this about. I'm excited to get your guys' thoughts, especially with your background and your knowledge. I want to just kick it off kind of from the beginning, kind of take it in chronological order with all of this. So 2020, April 20th, when George Floyd was killed, when the situation all began, what was going through mind, or what was your immediate reaction to this situation?
I think for me, sadly, I wasn't shocked. I was following a lot of activists and community organizers. And so I was laying in my bed. I specifically remember I was about to go to sleep. And so I'm just scrolling on Instagram and I see a video and I'm like, oh, I'm going to play it. It's going to be a quick, police brutality video. And then I witnessed a man literally dying. Like, somebody for once caught all of this. It wasn't a body camera. It was a person who didn't edit it out. Certain things we saw the entire time. And I just remember pouring tears in my bed, not from being shocked about the situation, but for once being able to see everything and not someone manipulating the details for me. And so I was just hurt at the end of the day. Like, there was no other way of putting it. For days, I think me, my friends, my community, and when I say community, I mean the Black community, not where I live, we were grieving together. And it was just I can't even say that I felt empowered. I was honestly afraid, of the cops I would go by. I was afraid of, racists in the town, of how they would react. I was afraid of everything. We were traumatized, afraid, and I didn't want to go anywhere. And I was just with my parents, really. And I was just, I don't know if Ally can relate, but I was just kind of stunned.
Mm-hmm.
I was stuck
Mm-hmm.
almost. It took a lot of, almost like George Floyd was a family member. It took a lot to even get out in the streets and protest. But I was going through a grief period, pretty much.
Yeah, no, 100%. I was in Canada when I was living back home last year during the beginning of quarantine when I saw it. I've never watched the video. I've obviously seen clips of it because it was at one point impossible to avoid the images, and I have a very sensitive disposition. So when I allow myself to absorb those types of images and imagery that's available on the internet, it shuts me down so much in a way that I feel like I can't be proactive about things. So I don't typically watch a lot of the videos, but just like Ashley said, the trauma from it all, and then consequently the idea of like doom scrolling that essentially followed right after, where every outlet that you looked at, news, social media, were all talking about the same thing, and it was almost impossible to escape that like just general feeling of like confusion and stress and how does something like this happen when there's so many people around, like cops, I mean, but also, like I think you said too, a small piece of me wasn't surprised, I guess, because of course, if you understand history, this has been going on for so long, but watching it like play out in the way that it did was very unique. And I think that's why it impacted communities the way that it did.
Do you think, Ashley, bouncing off of you when you said, it was a sense of you was afraid, do you think that COVID was almost like a safety net to be able to stay home more than you typically ever would? But then it also was maybe not a safety net, because then you're staying home and you're trapped, and the only thing you're seeing is Ally, what you're talking about, all the things, it's like you couldn't escape it.
I think both of the sides you're arguing, I think both are correct. I think in a sense, for me, the best part was, so I did work at a prison, right? And I worked at a prison purposely, and I say this because I feel like it's my testimony. I took a job that paid me less than what I was worth after a master's degree to purposely work at a facility that was full of Black incarcerated men. And I know during that time what they were experiencing, and the prison was created to work on the mental health of those who have experienced either high extremes of criminal behavior or drug usage, et cetera. So I worked as one of the counselors at the time. And we were locked out because of COVID out of the prison. And so I wasn't there to be a counselor for them. And it hurts me because at one point, yes, I was getting that almost mental health day that they didn't give us. Like, if you use a mental health day, it's considered a sick day, just a regular sick day. But if something like this happened, especially for people like me, my Black community, activists, people don't realize that trauma sits in us as well. When we're trying to help everyone get through theirs, it harms us in the end because we don't always take care of ourselves. And so it's great for me because I can sit home and I can say, oh, it was COVID because we didn't get to go to the prison at one point and work. We had to stay home. But then again, I think about the men who were in there and they don't get a day off. So they're told, whether they want to or not, you're going to get up, you're going to go get your food with everyone else. You're going to get up, you're going to go to the yard like everyone else. You're going to go shower like everyone else. They don't get that grief period. And so I think answering that question requires you to look at people specifically and what they were dealing with at that point, the environment they were in, to determine if COVID was in some way, shape, or form a relief for them.
I think I can add on to that because it's interesting. My perspective, I can say, was actually being in Canada, I felt the safety that I knew wasn't afforded to Black Americans in America. Like, I was with my African American husband, and there have been times that have like crossed my mind where I'm like, oh, I'm so thankful to be here right now, which is so almost disturbing to say in comparison, but there was like that horrible feeling of like relief of not being there. And I wasn't in America for a large amount of the riots. It was all just watching it at home in Toronto. And as I've detailed to a lot of people before, it's a very different environment up there compared to here completely, in so many different ways. So I was essentially afforded the luxury of kind of feeling like I was able to distance myself a bit more from it. And then ultimately making the decision to come back down to America with already the purpose of, the only reason I moved back down here was to do the work that I want to do in this country and help heal this country. So it was a huge part of my inspiration to come back to America and be a part of this community again that gave me a very extreme culture shock when I moved here when I was 18.
I think too, like going with Allie's point, even though you weren't here, Allie, I mean, you can probably attest to, we both, social media is our thing. So being locked into a house where, because of COVID, obviously you can't go anywhere, but all you have is your phone. So like you said, do that doom scrolling, you're just going and getting lost in all the information. Like that could stress you out even more. Like here's the stress already, but you just expanded it 10 times for yourself. So even though you were locked up, I'm pretty sure like some days, like you said, you were like, geez, this is almost close to home.
Oh yeah. Oh, it was such a traumatic time, I think, for everybody, experiencing so many different things at one time. You lost a job, lost the economy essentially collapsing, people were losing family members. And then every time you log on to something that was essentially an escape for most people from their lives, it was just nonstop hysteria. And, and even after George Floyd, it was like a snowball. Like there were just video after video and circumstance after circumstance. And it just felt like an absolute attack on like our mental. And then you had the people arguing with each other. And there was so much hate at one time in the world and so much anger that 100% I put my phone down so many times. And I'm sure more people can attest to that. You needed to just give yourself a break. So, yeah.
So then a year later, with the verdict, obviously the world is in a very different place than it was a year ago. But the verdict was also such a crazy time as well. What was the atmosphere of where you were, or did people feel the verdict was or the trial, I guess, while the trial was going on, did people feel that others were educated on what was happening in the trial? Was that something that maybe people had to go looking for? What was the atmosphere where you both were towards the whole trial and I guess the verdict itself?
I think that, so during my time, I'm fortunate enough, obviously, to be a law student. And so we're constantly talking about legal matters. And so while it may not come up within our classrooms, which is surprising because it's a quote unquote controversial topic, it does show up in our conversations, in our law group chats, or just our regular study groups, things like that. So we talk about it. And when the verdict came back, we're celebrating in the group chats. People are like guilty, like screaming, like people are having like time of their lives. And then 2 seconds, it's like snap back to reality. It means nothing. I mean, like, yeah, it's a guilty verdict, but at the end of the day, the thought that a child lost her father and is not going to have that man in her life ever again, and the fact that like family members are still grieving and they can only celebrate for so long until they start crying again, and then the fact that there took so many not guilty convictions for us to celebrate this one guilty conviction. And even when we've gotten guilty convictions in the past, they've been like 7 years or less. And so the fact that this one is extended, it was like, oh, this is a celebratory moment. But then it almost hurt because the people came out saying that this man plans to appeal. And I don't care if he's going to win or lose on the appeal. It's the fact that he has the energy to say, I'm going to try to appeal. It's a blatant disrespect in the end. And so we're right back. While I want to say we've advanced, I feel like we're more woke. We've had to cut some people back on and say, yes, racism is still a thing. And every single room you go into, you're going to have to notice it, whether you want to blind yourself to it or not. It's still around. It's been around for decades. It's perpetuated itself through the same system, cycle after cycle. It's still around. So yes, we woke people up. But at the end of the day, we are still sitting on the same results we've seen time and time again, that once that person's life is gone, it's gone. And so I can't celebrate too long the loss of another life after another life if the only form of punishment stops at incarceration. There has to be something else, and reform is not going to do it. I believe in reform, but reform is not going to solve the issues. So right now I feel like the atmosphere is very, I think we are at a period where we're seeing a test of whether you're a social justice warrior through what is popular at the time, or if you are going to be one of those ground level, grassroots type workers and really spark some change. Like, I'll see you in the street, but I'll also see you at the voting polls, you know?
Yeah. Quick point with that too. I had just recently found out, because of course last year during all of it, oh my gosh, I was exhausted with the company statements and the, rollouts of they're going to do this and pledge this and do that. It was so nauseating. And surprisingly enough, every company has to release their, yearly donations or whatever. And of course, those big dogs like Sony and Amazon that made the powerful statements of 40 million for this, 50 million for that, and everything, they ended up only giving 1 or 2. And it's like, okay, cool. Thank you for the 1 or 2. But it's just like the audacity to create this astronomical number that you can't commit to, just to be I don't even really understand it, to be the leader or have the best, facade and publicity and whatever. It was just ridiculous. But with the verdict, I got a few texts here and there. This is great, exciting. And I felt joy for the family, of course, because they felt joy. And that's all that mattered to me, was that his, family felt joy from it. My arousal response system has been so sensitized that I was happy, but there's just like so many issues swimming through my brain at so many different times that I just, like you said, I don't want anything to just stop here, which I feel like some people have just stopped there. And what was it? Nancy Pelosi said something grotesque about him sacrificing his life for all of us to wake up or something like that. And I saw a lot of that, which like, I don't really allow myself to subscribe to those types of things that I know are going to upset me in a way. But there was so many different things going on that I just only felt joy for their family. But like you said, you just get back to work the next day. Like nothing, you don't really feel, I didn't feel too much. I was happy because it does set that precedent that was necessary. But at the same time, all it really does is set the precedent in the state of Minnesota, whereas there's states all across the country that have been reversing and going back on their words. Even Minneapolis, they've gone back on most of their words. And Seattle, who said that they were going to cut their police budget by 50%, and then that just ended up falling through. So there's a lot of very like glossy statements people made, and then the work was never done. But I think most of us are still powering through and contributing. And if anything, it was just like that light, that small light that kind of like allows us to keep going and have faith that we can hopefully keep the ball rolling and change can happen.
One of the things that I found interesting, so the Minneapolis mayor said the day after the verdict was announced, the Minneapolis mayor said, being Black in America shouldn't mean a death sentence. And the one thing I wrote down from what both of you had said is, I wrote down, all these people are saying what people want to hear. How do you get past, a part of marketing and a part of business sometimes is doing saying what people want to hear, but how do you break that barrier of like, sure, this is what people want to hear, and maybe, like I wrote down earlier, what the mayor had said was incredibly direct, but it still, at the end of the day, was what people wanted to hear, and maybe what they needed to hear that day. But then how do you, number one, break that barrier of what people want to hear and saying what you need to be said, or saying what needs to be said?
I think if you're not genuine about it, you shouldn't say anything. I would rather, and my friends and I've had this conversation plenty of times, and the question falls back on, do you want to hear from the disingenuine, pro-Black Lives Matter person that, pops up every once in a blue moon and they're doing it for the popularity? Do you want them to still say something? Or do you have more respect for the blatant racist that says, this is just not me and I don't think your life matters and anything like that? And usually most of us agree I would rather the racist say to my face, I don't believe in what you're doing and I don't like you and I'll never like you, than to have someone fake stand by my side that could possibly stab me in the back later. The one thing I always say is it's very quickly that your ally could become your oppressor if they don't alter who they are. And so if these companies are coming forth and saying, yeah, we're for you, we love you, blah, 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 and 2 seconds later that they're at these big galas investing in racist policies and racist politicians, then it means nothing at all in the end, right? And so I think at this point, all I'm expecting out of people is a genuine approach to what they're doing. If you don't mean it, keep it at home. And if you do mean it, fine, let's get to work. Let's be in the streets together. But I think these companies also, it is their job and their duty that if you are going to take a stance and you are truly invested, whether it be a company, individual, a politician, or just on the street, I think your role is to educate yourself. And I think we are lacking in the education aspect of moving forward. You can't advance if you do not know your history. We talk about this all the time in one of my internships, and it's the Sankofa symbol, and it's pretty much saying you have to look back at what your community has been through in order to move forward. And so if you don't recognize that it literally used to be a crime for Black people to stand in a group during Jim Crow or during the slave codes, as well as the transition to Jim Crow, it was literally a crime for Black people to loiter, to stand around. If you don't understand that even back then, people were being sent to jail and building up jail numbers and creating private prisons, economically advancing off of the backs of Black people, you don't understand how that perpetuates itself in our system today. You don't understand why George Floyd literally going into a gas station or going into a convenience store is such a big deal to see him go from there to dead on the ground. If you don't understand that this has happened not only during the last 10 years, it's been happening for centuries, then you actually will never understand what it means to be an ally. And if you don't take that time to do that groundwork that I've talked about before, to actually go and educate yourself, your community, your company, then anything you say could potentially just be dangerous in the end.
Where do people educate themselves, or how do they find that education? Do you think there's enough readily available for people, or is that something that they have to take the time to do? Is that something people should
education is
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say the education is out there. It's all out there. If you literally find one book, it's kind of like YouTube. If you click on a video on YouTube, you get a bunch of recommended stuff, right? And stuff just keeps popping up and you're all of a sudden in this black hole. You have no idea how you got there, but you keep watching the videos, right? It's almost the same thing as if you're trying to figure out, how did we get to this point? You read one book, you can read The New Jim Crow, a very popularized social justice-driven criminal justice book. You can read that book. And I swear to you, if you even Google the author's name, Michelle Alexander, then you're going to find 15 billion other articles she was involved in. And then from there, you're going to find other authors. And from there, you're going to find out why we don't teach critical race theory in our classrooms. And from there, you're going to learn that a lot of the education we've learned is entirely incorrect. And from there, you're going to learn that we were kings and queens and living beautifully before all of this. You're going to find yourself in a cycle. I know it sounds crazy, but it's because this stuff is there. And I think it falls back too many times on the educated to uplift the uneducated. And while I do appreciate answering people's questions and interviewing and being there and advocating, I love this work, I always feel sad at times because if I don't teach somebody, they may not look for it on their own. And it goes back to, are you as genuine as you say you are? If you truly care, will you do the work if I walk away? And if the answer is no, then something has to be corrected within your behavior before I can even help you.
Do you think people are scared to educate themselves, or people are scared to speak out and be a part of it?
I think it's scared, but I think it's also
or intimidated, maybe?
Yeah,
definitely intimidated.
I've always heard this quote one of my friends uses, and I love it. And she says, you don't know what you don't know. And so if you don't know these things, possibly finding them out could be could be fearsome, not because it might be something so extreme that you're going to feel bad about, but because it's potentially going to contradict every single thing you've been taught. And so it's not, am I going to believe this information when I find it out? I think it's, well, what about what I've already learned, you know? And I think people are going to be almost confused. Like, what do I do with this information? I'm balancing it. I don't know what to do. But I think that the fear comes to when we don't know about things, life is good. It's like a baby that doesn't know it exists, you know?
Smooth rolling.
Right. Babies just see babies and they want to play. But when you're at this age and you're walking, especially in this dark melanated skin, every day, and you see the side eyes that you can't ignore, and you're experiencing these little things, it's going to play on your mind and stuff. And so people, if they truly want to even be a friend and understand me, they're going to have to either hear me talk about it and be educated that way, or they're going to have to put in the work, because there's only so many times I think we can have these conversations and help other people that don't want to help themselves.
I think that was the one great thing that did come out from this, is I did have a lot of people reaching out. They wanted to learn. And like you said, like, sometimes it's like, okay, guys, I didn't grow up here. I didn't grow up learning American history, yet I can talk anyone's ear off about anything that happened in American history. I can name every single one of your presidents, and my husband doesn't even know what's going on. Like, and that was over the course of 3 years that I just studied and committed and knew that I needed to understand these things. And I did it all on the internet. I didn't even learn in university in America all of the things that I know now. Like you said, that was my first book that I ever read concerning social justice, was Michelle Alexander's book. And it completely changed my life. And then Just Mercy came along and it completely changed my life. And so as soon as you kind of allow yourself to get proximate to these issues, you understand everything so much clearer, and it's all right there. So something I did was I had collected over time all of these social justice books. And even though sometimes looking back on it, I do regret it because I write a lot of notes in my books, but I just handed them out. And this was when I was in Canada, and a lot of the people who wanted them on my Instagram were in America. So I was like, you know what, I will pay to send these to you as long as you promise to read them. And it was all white people that reached out to me who wanted to read the books. And I thought that was courageous to be able to DM me, and they talked about the books with me afterwards. And we had great conversations about it. And I think that does, at the end of the day, hold at least some weight that they started their journey of education about it. But I also think that there was, and I felt it a lot too, a lot of confusion and a lot of pulls in different directions because there are so many issues. Which issue do you want to talk about? Police brutality, poverty, housing inequality, racial inequity, like mass incarceration? Oh my gosh, there's so much, just the criminal justice system overall in this entire country, and every little corner that exists in, you could drive yourself crazy. And at one point I was driving myself crazy. I didn't know where I fit in. I didn't know which issue to tackle because you can't commit to all of them. I couldn't do it. I was exhausted. I was sad all the time. And my brain was just like in overdrive. I committed to one issue, and that's what I focused on. And because of that, though, if people can find what they're really passionate about in this mess of issues, then you devote all your time to that issue, and you can change it if you just focus on maybe one thing or one or two things. Depends on how, great you can juggle. But for me, hounding down on one issue was how I was able to receive any type of clarity and really feel like this is where I belong. This is my purpose, and this is what I can do here and study and be a part of. So I think in the mess of everything, instead of just like trying to absorb it all, people just need to figure out where they can help and just do that. If that's, instead of like not doing anything and being like, okay, this is what's happening, and I'm just going to sit here and post about it and that's it. No, just focus on one thing and then help with that one thing if it's easier, because then all your time is going towards it. So that was, yeah.
It's interesting that you bring that up because even when I was writing down talking points for this, I was on the internet looking at different things. I was reading the articles, I was looking at the numbers. And two things that I came across that it kind of surprised me, but it also was like, obviously this is going to happen, is the number of people that even went to TikTok to like share how they felt, or on Facebook or here or there. And it's like, I had so many questions for so many of these people because I was like, is this, it's like I go and I listen to your TikTok, or I read your Facebook post, or I read your Instagram post, but then it's like I have to cross check if this is correct.
Yeah.
And I'm like, a natural person doesn't want to have to take the time to watch someone's TikTok and then go have to cross check the internet for facts.
But no one does that.
No.
Yeah.
But do you think that's maybe like an issue with part of this, is that people are just taking to with their personal, and like, how do you shut that down? Because it's probably never going to happen, but I mean, even just influence the importance of the education to them.
Well, even to your point that you wrote down with us with defunding the police, I personally, and I'd love to know if you guys agree, but my personal opinion was I 100% agreed with Obama that the slogan was too confusing to people. And in order to enact change, you have to not adhere to the opposition, but sometimes you do have to just change your wording to help them to understand, because the opposition is who you need to appeal to. These are the people whose minds you need to change, because they're the reason why we're not moving forward. So succumbing to your ego of not wanting to do that is kind of what was frustrating for me. And there are a million definitions of defunding the police out there. And then, of course, consequently, people think that the rise in violence is due to defunding the police, when no police station actually defunded, and any that did were actually just because of COVID cuts, nothing to do with actual legislation. So there's just so much confusion, and then people misinterpret, and then the opposition gets angrier. And so being able to, personally, especially because I'm interested in trauma and obviously mental health, is I would like to see the police defunded, because obviously they're paid astronomically, and most of their budget goes towards the actual cops. So obviously a lot of that can be cut and redirected to mental health facilities, which was Minneapolis's first thing they wanted to be able to do. And lots of things happened with that as to why it hasn't happened yet. City council's arguing with Mayor Frey, and they can't get anything done. But ideally, that's my version of defunding the police, but I don't think I would ever use the slogan. I would just say, we need to reallocate the funds, because all of the problems sit within poor mental health facilities, poor community service facilities. You're not giving them, job opportunities, so many things. That my city of Miami, they just passed an act called Peace and Prosperity Act, and there are so many things. It's a $60 million investment that's due to the fact that we have an increase in violence. Fantastic. So much money is going towards community youth centers and at-risk youth, and the poverty here is outrageous, and so much money is going towards that. But then they're also increasing the police budget by like 9%. So they're going to also put more cops on the street. So as much as like cities are making these changes and adhering to these like new ideas, they're still going back and reverting to the same mistakes that they continuously make. They're also including the fact, they're calling on the fact that they also want longer sentences for children, 20-year-olds who commit violent acts. They're calling for longer sentences to be involved in this act that is going to be passed. And so everything that keeps moving forward, there's also 50 steps that we're taking backwards. So, yeah.
I think defunding is like...
I forget what my point was, so I was like...
No. I think just going off it, my immediate reaction is like, I agree that the verbiage is so bad. It's so bad. Because I feel that defunding, personally, to me, it's like, I'm going to defund you. It's like, that's insulting. Like that's
Defunding and abolition are so different.
The word, right, but like the
They're
word,
not
the way the word
interchangeable.
sounds.
Well, I think that goes back to the point of the social media, like how you look. Okay, let's go back to the original point being the TikTok, right? So if somebody makes a TikTok and they post it and it's not, we don't know if it's correct, right? It's bigger than a conversation on social justice. That happens every single day. We're looking at a big problem right here when really that's something that happens on a normal basis. If someone told you how Louis Vuitton got designed, if you see it on TikTok and it sounds good, you're gonna run with it, repost it. Right. Sound good. You're not gonna actually go and do the research.
No.
It's what catches your attention, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what TikTok is.
And
it's
what you want to hear.
Exactly. What can I catch with your attention in a minute, 30 seconds, or whatever the time frame is? And with that information, it is then on the viewer to decide what they're going to do later. And so while I think that it may suck that people can put out false information on the time, really it's the same thing that you learn in the classroom. If you're not going to cross-check it yourself, then that falls back on you, not the person that you went to out of straight ignorance. It's only ignorant when you choose to remain ignorant. And so I think that's a little problem for a big pond. It's something bigger than that. The person can always alter what they want to view, and if they want to cross-check for the rest of their lives, they can do that. But that takes you going back and formally educating yourself so you don't get confused later on down the road. I also think that, obviously I work for the state, so I'm not gonna say too much on the issue of defunding, but I will say that when it comes down to it, I agree and disagree with what Obama said, and I love me some Obama. But the reason I disagree is, it is not until we make people uncomfortable that they want to see something, that they're open-eared, that they're allowing things to take place around them. The craziest part is that for a very long time, we've had to ask for permission from white people to specifically act the way that we want to act, to say the things that we want to say, and to be the way that we are. And so if my Blackness already scares you, if it already makes you uncomfortable, then anything that leaves my lips, it's going to do the same thing. So why don't I give you hell if I have to, right? And so when I say defund the police out loud, oh, it shakes the room, but it got your attention. It can become a powerful hashtag, so it has you scrolling. It has people that would have never listened to me in the first place, at least listening to me so they can go talk crap about it later. But you heard it. It came up in conversation. And I think that we have to ask ourselves whether we appreciate comfort or if we appreciate conversation. And if you choose, same situation, if you choose to remain ignorant on what defunding is, because it doesn't sit right with me when I hear it, it doesn't sound right, well, you chose to remain ignorant. Just like if I watch a TikTok, I chose to remain ignorant. You chose not to do the research. And it goes back to how people have been forever. We are sitting on laws right now that still don't make sense in our society based on this progressive state that we're in. I think it's slipping my mind, even the 13th Amendment. In the 13th Amendment specifically, it has not outlawed the fact that Black people, well, let me not say Black, that people themselves can actually still be enslaved. The only thing that was outlawed was legal slavery. But if you were still in jail, because literally, like I said, it was a crime for Black people to gather and loiter in places, so they would send you to jail. Your master would come get you out of jail, or your next potential master, and say, oh, you're technically free, but just come work for me. If you don't know that in the 13th Amendment that was never outlawed and how we got mass incarceration, then you chose to remain ignorant. The information is there, you have to seek it. And so even though it's an uncomfortable topic, it sounds a little weird, we're acting like we have to convert ourselves to make our oppressors pay attention to us. And we're forgetting that Black people for a very, very long time have progressed around this nation without the help of any other person. We invented science, we invented math, the natives taught people how to use the land. We minorities have done things on our own, so we don't really need help. If we wanted to be in every single seat of Congress, we can find a way to make it happen. It may sound a little crazy, but we can find a way. And so if we wanted these things, we would go for it. So it's not that we need to make everyone else in the room comfortable to get the job done. It's what we've been taught to do, because we've been taught to be silent. We've been taught to not be too loud. We've been taught that kneeling is bad, so you may not want to do it. We've been taught all these things, but it doesn't matter how we protest, what we say. If people don't like you, they're just not going to like you. And there's not a thing you can do to change that, but be yourself.
Yeah. last question. We've already gone on for 40 minutes. I'm gonna ask last question. It's crazy. Rolling by. Well, I guess I'll ask your guys' opinion. Would you rather spend the last 10 minutes talking the Black Lives Matter movement or where we're headed next as Americans? I feel like we've kind of covered the Black Lives Matter a little. You wanted to cover where we're headed next as Americans?
Sure.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so wrap it up today. Let's end it with where, Ally, you go ahead first. Where do you feel or do you think we are headed next as Americans following the George Floyd case?
I'm a very positive person, so I'll see some sort of light in anything. And like we've kind of already discussed, we've really come extremely far from like the 1960s and the late 1990s. We've obviously made tremendous progress. I hope that Biden goes through with most of his promises with, for example, my, personal act that I really hope goes forward is the American Families Act, which concerns mostly cutting poverty through channeling federal funds to specific states and, building up, like what I've already talked about, the mental health facilities and community youth programs and in places where I think it really matters. But it's really easy to fall into cynicism, especially where I live, where I just I'm like exhausted constantly by the violence and the poverty. But I'm optimistic that the right people are coming into power. We elected a lot of new people in Florida during the election year who are coming through with some promises. And so I do hope that, we continue to foster this woke culture. I don't really like to use the word woke. This culture of being more empathetic and compassionate to everybody and just overall more understanding with each other, because there's going to be things that people just don't understand. And I'm okay with being the person to, I guess, be patient with everyone. And I think we all need a little bit more patience with everyone in the sense that like we said, having conversations and educational resources so we can continue this like really great snowball effect that's happening where we can change so many things locally, state by state and nationally, because we have most of the right people in power. And so I just hope that power continues to be used positively, especially as the economy heals. So I guess I just hope.
Actually,
I think that right now, one of the biggest areas I think are advancing is the liberation of young people and us encouraging young people for using their voice. I think for a long time, especially in our community, you were taught, be quiet when grown folks are talking. And if it's a grown folk conversation, see your way out.
Yeah.
But now we're encouraging our youth to believe that they have a voice, and the voice is powerful enough to use, whether that be in protest or in the classroom or whatever it is. And so I think encouraging them to not only step up, but showing them that there's more to just their neighborhood, that they can be, I don't care where you grew up, that you can exit out of that and be something great. And having our young people take education seriously, past just working for a grade, but also educating themselves outside of the classroom. I think that shift is going to, like I said, liberate the younger generation to the point that they are going to be ready for whatever challenge comes their way, whether it's COVID, social justice issues, financial issues, etc. I think as well as we should be as a community looking at how we can invest in the disenfranchised. And that doesn't necessarily just mean the Black community, but disenfranchised groups are all over. And I think a lot of the times we're talking about equality and saying that we want everybody to have access to the same resources. Well, somebody still has access to a resource, like you give them a book, and they're so it's two, if you have two fifth graders, right, and you give them each a book, well, that's equality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Give one a book, and yet you failed them in every subject before that, and they done god awful, their reading level is low, and this person over here, their reading level has always been high, they've had the best school tutors, they've been able to afford all these things, then this person over here is disenfranchised. And so we have to look at the equity part of it and how we're going to put that disenfranchised group in a greater position to move forward. And I think we as a community, whether that be through legislation or just individuals, need to learn what's best for our community and the individuals sitting there. And that's going to take holding our elected officials accountable in various ways. And part of what I'm trying to do now is getting young people as well as the Black community to recognize the importance of voting. And I don't like to talk about it and don't like to relate it to our ancestors and things like that. And that's fine if you don't want to relate it to that, but just recognizing how powerful even the census and voting is economically for a community. And I think within right now, a lot of the stuff that we're doing when it comes to voting in prison, with the mass incarceration of Black people, voting is important. Voting was never intended to be a constitutional right taken away once you're incarcerated, but it was also never a right given. And so we're trying to make it a right that's formally given to every single person. And I think that's moving very rapidly within Illinois. Within the next, I want to say 2 years, if we get something like that to pass, then the amount of work that politicians in the Illinois area will have to go through in order to get elected is going to be extreme, which is a good thing because they're going to have to fight for their seats, and I'm excited.
In Illinois, that matters. It's a big deal in Illinois. You guys got to get the right people in there.
Especially the amount of people locked up in Cook County, good grief.
Exactly. It's a big deal.
Well, thank you two for getting on here with me today. Great conversation. Appreciate you too. Amazing knowledge from both of you. Can learn so much from all of you.